Hello, and welcome to Ancient Tale Weaver. When I talk about the great Greek heroes, one name dominates: Heracles, Hercules, the demigod of impossible strength, who wrestled monsters and held up the sky. He was a creature of beer, of pure, brute force. But the Greeks, they had another hero, a hero who was, in many ways, his opposite. A hero who was not just strong, but clever. A hero who didn't just smash his problems, but thought his way through them. He was a hero of Metis, of cunning. He was the founder king, the civilizer, the man who battled bandits, debated kings, and gave his own people their first democracy. But his story is soaked in tragedy. It's a story defined by a secret birth, a terrible curse, a labyrinth, a monster, and a simple, forgotten promise that led to his own father's death. This is the full story of Theseus, the greatest hero of Athens. Our story doesn't begin with Theseus. It begins with his father, or, at least, his mortal father, King Aegeus of Athens. In those days, Athens was not the great power we think of. It was a weak city, living in shame. It was a tributary state, forced to pay a terrible, bloody price to a foreign king. And its own king, Aegeus, had a personal tragedy. He was childless. He had no heir. His family line was ending, and his city was in bondage. Desperate, he did what all ancient kings did. He travelled to the centre of the world. He went to the oracle at Delphi. "Pythia," he begged, "give me a son. How can I have an heir?" The oracle, as she always did, answered him with a riddle. A strange, confusing, and frankly, very specific riddle. She warned him, "Great king, you must not untie the bulging mouth of the wineskin until you have returned to the highest heights of Athens." Aegeus had no idea what this meant. The bulging mouth of the wineskin. It made no sense. Confused and dejected, he began his journey home. On the way, he stopped in the city of Troezen to visit his old friend, the wise King Pythias. He told him the riddle, expecting his friend to be just as confused. But Pythias was very wise. And he, I think, was also an incredible opportunist. He understood the riddle perfectly. The oracle was saying that Aegeus was fated to father a great hero, but he was supposed to wait until he was home in Athens. The bulging wineskin was, well, him. Pythias, realizing this, saw his chance. He wanted this great future hero to be his grandson. So, that night, he broke the prophecy. He got his friend, King Aegeus, very, very drunk on wine, and then he sent his own daughter, the Princess Aethra, to Aegeus's bed. That night, the hero, Theseus, was conceived. The next morning, Aegeus awoke. He realized what had happened. He had broken the prophecy. He knew he had to return to Athens, alone. He couldn't take Aethra or the child. He was too weak, and his own nephews were plotting to take his throne. So, he set a test. He took Aethra to a giant, impossibly heavy boulder. He placed his own royal sword and his golden sandals beneath it. "If you bear me a son," he commanded, "do not tell him my name. Raise him, train him. When he is strong enough, if he is strong enough to lift this stone alone, then he may claim his birthright. Tell him to bring the sword and sandals and come to me." It was the Greek sword in the stone, a test of worthiness. A son was born. His name was Theseus. And here, the myth gets interesting. I love this detail. The legend says that on the same night Aethra lay with the drunken Aegeus, she also went to the sea and was possessed by the god Poseidon. This makes Theseus just like Heracles, the son of two fathers, a mortal king and a god. He had the royal blood of Athens and the divine strength of the sea. He grew up hearing stories of his cousin, the great Heracles, and he was obsessed. He wanted to be Heracles. He trained, he grew strong, and finally, on his 18th birthday, his mother took him to the rock. "It is time," she said. Theseus, his divine strength surging, went to the stone, and he lifted it. He had passed the test. He took his father's sword. He strapped on his father's sandals. He was, finally, the heir to Athens. His mother and grandfather begged him, "Take the sea. It's safe. It's fast. Sail to your father." Theseus looked at the safe ship, and then he looked at the dangerous, winding land road that led to Athens. This road was a nightmare. It was infested with the worst criminals, bandits, and monsters in all of Greece. This was Theseus's first great choice. What would Heracles do? His idol, Heracles, had spent his life making the world safe. He had fought monsters. Theseus, in this moment, decides he will not just claim his kingdom. He will earn it. He will cleanse this road. Heracles took the hard path, Theseus said. So will I. He was not just going to Athens, he was going on his own. Labours. And what a series of labours they were. This journey, this single journey, is what made him a legend. First, he met Periphetes, the club bearer, a giant who would smash travellers' skulls with a massive bronze club. Theseus, being faster and smarter, dodged the blow, disarmed him, and, using the same club, killed him. Theseus kept the club. It was his first trophy, a clear sign that he was the new Heracles. Second, he met Sinis, the pine bender, a truly horrific man. He would ask travellers to help him bend 2 pine trees to the ground. Then, he would tie the poor victim between the 2 trees and let go, ripping them in half. Theseus, pretending to help, overpowered Sinis and gave him the exact same fate, poetic justice. Third, he hunted and killed the Crommyonian sow, a monstrous giant pig that was terrorizing the entire countryside. He was not just a warrior, he was a protector, he continued. Fourth, he met Sciron, an old man who guarded a cliff path. He would force travellers to stop and wash his feet, and as they knelt, he would kick them off the cliff, to be devoured by a giant sea turtle waiting below. Theseus, expecting the trick, grabbed Sciron's foot and flipped him off the cliff instead. The turtle was fed. Fifth, he met Circean, a brutal king who forced everyone into a wrestling match to the death. But Heracles had taught Theseus that strength isn't everything. Theseus invented wrestling technique. He used leverage and skill, and slammed the brute to his death. And finally, the 6th and most famous labour, Procrustes, the stretcher, an innkeeper with a very special iron bed. He promised it fit everyone perfectly. Why? Because if a guest was too short, he would hammer them and stretch them to fit. And if they were too tall, he would take his axe and chop off their feet. He was a symbol of arbitrary, cruel law. Theseus, the civilizer, overpowered him and fitted Procrustes to his own bloody bed. The road was clear. The path was safe. Theseus, now a living legend, arrived at Athens. The people loved him. They hailed him as a saviour. He was the hero who had finally, single-handedly, cleansed the land of monsters. He was invited to the palace by the king, but he didn't reveal who he was. He wanted to see his father first. He wanted to choose the moment. This was a mistake, because his father was no longer in charge. When Theseus entered the throne room, he saw his father, King Aegeus, but beside him was a new wife, a dark, beautiful sorceress. It was Medea. Yes, that Medea. She didn't see a hero. She saw the true heir, a threat to her son's claim to the throne. She had to kill him. She couldn't kill him publicly. He was a hero. So, she whispered poison in Aegeus's ear. My king, this hero, he is too popular. The people love him. He is not here to help. He is here to take your throne. Aegeus, old, paranoid, and weak, believed her. You must kill him first, Medea urged. At the feast, a toast with poisoned wine. The plan was set. Theseus, the hero, was welcomed. He was offered the golden cup. He took it, but, as a sign of respect, before he drank, he said, My king, allow me to carve the meat for your feast. And to carve, he drew his sword, the sword from under the rock, the sword of his father. Aegeus froze. He wasn't looking at Theseus. He was looking at the sword. He knew that hilt. He knew that ancient serpent crest. It was his. The boy was his son. Just as Theseus was raising the poisoned cup to his lips, Aegeus roared, My son! He leapt across the table and slapped the cup from his hand. The poisoned wine spilled harmlessly on the floor. Medea, her plot failed, shrieked, summoned a cloud of dark magic, and fled, vanishing from Athens forever. And in the great hall, the king embraced his son. The city of Athens had an heir. The celebration was the greatest in the city's history. The old, childless king had found his son, and that son was the greatest hero of the age. But, as I said, Athens was a city in shadow. And in the middle of this joyous celebration, the crowd fell silent. A new sound was heard in the harbour. A horn, a single, mournful, terrible horn. Theseus looked at his father. What is that? Aegeus's face, which had been filled with joy, collapsed into pure despair. The tribute, he whispered. The ship has come. Theseus watched as a single, massive ship, its sails pitch black, docked. Heralds from Crete, from King Minos, walked ashore. The time had come to pay the blood debt. The time had come for the Minotaur. Hello, and welcome back. When I left you, Athens was in the middle of a joyous celebration. The hero Theseus had returned, cleansed the land, survived the poison of Medea, and been recognized by his father, King Aegeus. The city, at last, had an heir, but that celebration was shattered by the arrival of a single, black-sailed ship. King Aegeus looked at his son, his face collapsing in despair. The tribute, he whispered. The ship has come. Theseus, of course, knew nothing of this. What tribute? Father, what is this shadow over our city? And so, Aegeus had to tell him. He told him the story we explored in our last epic, the story of King Minos of Crete. He told him how Minos, in his arrogance, had broken his oath to Poseidon, how the god, in his terrible vengeance, had cursed his wife, Queen Pasiphae, to fall in love with a divine white bull. He told him of the horrible, monstrous offspring of that union, the Minotaur, half man, half bull, a creature of savage, cannibalistic hunger. He told him how Minos, in his shame, had forced the great inventor Daedalus to build an impossible, unsolvable prison, the Labyrinth. And then, he told him, the final terrible part of the story. My son, Aegeus, wept, had a son of his own, Androgeos. He competed in our games. He was too good. He won everything. And the Athenians, in their jealousy, murdered him. King Minos, in his grief and rage, declared war. He conquered us. Our city was his. But he did not burn it. He demanded A blood price. A tribute. Aegeus looked at the black ship. Every 9 years, Athens must send 7 of its noblest young men and 7 of its most beautiful maidens to be taken to Crete. They are not made slaves, they are food. They are thrown one by one into the labyrinth, to be devoured by the Minotaur. Theseus, the hero who had just cleansed the road to Athens of its monsters, now learned that his own city was feeding its children to a new monster. He watched as the terrible lottery began. As the heralds of Minos walked through the city, and the families of Athens wept as the black stones were drawn, he saw the 14 young tributes weeping, being led to the ship, and his face turned to iron. He stepped forward. "Stop," he commanded. The heralds paused. The weeping stopped. "The lottery is over." He walked to one of the young men, pushed him aside, and took his place. "I, Theseus, Prince of Athens, son of Aegeus, volunteer as tribute." A collective gasp. King Aegeus ran to him, grabbing his arm. "No, Theseus, you cannot. You are my only son, my heir. This is suicide. The labyrinth. No one has ever returned. It is a death sentence." Theseus looked at his father, his eyes calm. "I cleared the road to Athens of its bandits. Now, I will clear the sea of this monster. It is my duty as a prince. I will not send my people where I am not willing to go. I will go, and I will kill this beast. The tribute ends today." Aegeus, heartbroken, knew he could not stop him. The hero had chosen his path. The young prince boarded the ship of death. As it prepared to sail, Aegeus made one last, desperate, tragic plea. He ran to the edge of the cliff. "Theseus," he cried, "this ship, it bears the black sail of mourning. It is the signal of our defeat." He held up a large, folded, white sail. "Take this," he begged, "and if you live, if, by some miracle of the gods, you kill the beast, I beg of you, take down the black sail and raise this white one. I will be here. I will be watching this cliff every day. Let the white sail be the first thing I see. Let it tell me that my son is coming home." Theseus, his heart heavy, took the sail. "I promise, father." And the black-sailed ship sailed for Crete. They arrived at Knossos, the seat of King Minos' power. The 14 tributes were paraded through the streets, a symbol of Minos' power and Athens' shame. They were brought to the throne room. King Minos looked down on them with a cold, cruel indifference. "They are here," he announced. "At dawn, they will feed the beast." But someone else was watching. Standing in the shadows of the throne was the king's daughter, Princess Ariadne. She watched the tributes, her heart full of pity, and then her eyes locked on Theseus. She saw the others, weeping, terrified, but him, he was not afraid. He stood tall. He met her father's gaze with a look of pure, defiant, heroic anger, and in that instant, the gods, I believe, intervened. Aphrodite, or perhaps Hera, struck. Ariadne, the princess, fell. Impossibly, desperately, in love. She couldn't let him die. She, who was the daughter of the monster's mother, felt the guilt. She knew she had to betray her father. But how? The labyrinth was impossible. No one, not even the man who built it, could find his way out. Wait, the man who built it. That night, Ariadne ran, in secret, to a high, lonely tower, the prison workshop of Daedalus. Daedalus was a prisoner himself. Minos, terrified that his great inventor would share the secret of the labyrinth, had imprisoned him and his son, Icarus, in their own workshop. Ariadne, the only one with a key, came to him. "Master Daedalus," she pleaded, "I love him. The Athenian. I must save him. You built the maze. There must be a way." Daedalus, who also hated Minos, saw his chance. He saw a tool. "My child," he whispered, "the labyrinth is not a maze of walls. It is a maze of confusion. You cannot solve it." He went to his bench. He gave her two things. First, a sharp, balanced, magic sword. "This," he said, "is for the beast." And then he gave her the real secret. Not a map, not a riddle, a simple ball of string. "Tell your hero," Daedalus whispered, "to tie one end of this string to the entrance. As he goes in, tell him to unroll it as he walks. It will not show him the way, but it will be the only thing that can lead him back." That night, just before the dawn, Ariadne bribed the guards. She ran to the dungeon where the tributes were being held. She found Theseus. She pressed the sword and the magical string into his hands. "Your life is in this," she whispered. Theseus was stunned. "Why, princess? Why are you betraying your father? For me?" Ariadne, in the shadows, looked at him, her heart in her eyes. "Because I love you," she said. "And I have a condition, the same one Daedalus has. If you live, if you kill this monster, you cannot leave me here. My father will kill me. You must swear an oath to take me with you. Take me to Athens." Theseus, seeing this woman, this princess, sacrificing everything for him, gave his word. "I swear it. If I live, we live together." Dawn. The great, square stone door of the Labyrinth is rolled aside. A void of pure, cold darkness. The 14 tributes are marched to the entrance. The other 13 are weeping, crying, paralyzed with fear. Theseus is not. He is the hero. He kisses Ariadne one last time, in secret. He turns to the other tributes. "Stay here," he commands. "Huddle by the door. Do not move. I will go for you. I will be back." He took the end of Ariadne's thread. He tied it firmly to the stone doorpost. He looked into the darkness, and, with his sword in one hand and the ball of string in the other, he stepped, alone, into the maze. Hello, and welcome back to Ancient Tale Weaver. When I left you, our hero, Theseus, was returning to Athens in triumph. He had done the impossible. He had navigated the labyrinth, slain the Minotaur, and freed his city from its blood debt to Crete. But in his moment of victory, in his rush to get home, he made one simple, fatal mistake. He forgot to change the sail. He forgot the promise he made to his father, and his father, King Aegeus, waiting on the cliffs, saw the black sail of morning on the horizon. Believing his son was dead, he stepped off the cliff and fell to his death in the sea that would, forever after, bear his name. Theseus arrived not to a celebration, but to a funeral. He had killed the monster, but his carelessness had killed his father. He had left Trojan a hero, but he arrived in Athens as a king, and a grieving, guilty one at that. Theseus, I believe, channeled that grief into his work. He had seen the world. He had seen the power of Crete. He looked at his own kingdom, Attica, and saw a chaos. It wasn't a unified state. It was a collection of small, feuding towns and villages, each with its own king, its own laws. It was weak. And Theseus, the hero who had cleansed the roads, now decided to cleanse the government. He did something no other king had done. He travelled to every village. He negotiated. He fought. He bribed. He charmed. And he performed his greatest labour, a political one, the synoikismos, the unification of Attica. He convinced, or forced, all the minor kings to give up their power and to move their governments to his city. He made Athens the capital. He is credited with inventing the city-state of Athens. He was a true founder. But the man was still the hero. He could not sit still. His idol, Heracles, was still out there, performing his own labours. And on his 9th labour, the one to get the girdle of the Amazon queen, Theseus, went with him. He sailed with Heracles to the land of the warrior women, and while Heracles was fighting, Theseus, in the chaos, kidnapped the Amazon queen's sister, Antiope. Now, this is a dark story, but the myths say it turned into a true and bizarre love story. He took her back to Athens, and he married her. The civilized king married the wild Amazon queen. And for a time, they were happy. They had a son, Hippolytus. But this act, this kidnapping, would have terrible consequences. The Amazons did not take this lightly. In a shocking, unprecedented invasion, the entire Amazon army invaded Attica. They marched all the way to Athens itself. This was the Amazonomachy, the war with the Amazons. They set up camp on the very hill that would one day be called the Areopagus, the hill of Ares, the same hill where Orestes would one day be tried. Theseus, the king, was forced to defend his city, and his wife, the Amazon queen Antiope, in the ultimate act of loyalty, fought with him against her own people, and in that battle she was killed. Theseus had won. He had saved his city, but once again his own rash, heroic actions had cost him his wife. And this is where the story of Theseus really, I think, goes off the rails. This is where he meets the single worst influence of his life, Pirithous, the king of the Lapiths. Pirithous was a wild man, a brawler. He and Theseus started as enemies, but they fought, and they found they were equals. They swore an oath of eternal brotherhood. They were the new Heracles and Iolaus. A perfect team. Pirithous got married, and he invited his new best friend Theseus, and he also invited his other neighbours, the centaurs, half man, half horse, and notoriously bad at holding their liquor. At the wedding, the centaurs got drunk, very drunk, and their animal nature took over. They saw the Lapith women, and they attacked. They tried to kidnap and assault the bride and all the female guests, right there at the feast. A horrific, savage battle erupted. The Centauromachy, it was Theseus and the Lapiths against the monstrous centaurs. Theseus, again, was the hero. He saved the day. He and Pirithous cemented their friendship in blood. And now, the two middle-aged, arrogant heroes are at the height of their power. And they make a pact, a terrible, foolish, hubristic pact. They decide that they are so great. They deserve divine wives. They deserve daughters of Zeus. They decide to kidnap them. Their first target, the most beautiful girl in the world, a young, very young, princess of Sparta. A girl named Helen. Yes, that Helen of Troy. She was, at this time, maybe 12 years old. The two heroes kidnapped a child. They stormed Sparta, stole her, and drew lots for her. Theseus won. He won Helen of Troy. He then hid her, intending to keep her locked away until she was old enough to marry. This is not a hero's act. This is a villain's. But they weren't done. Theseus had his prize. Now, Pirithous needed his, and he, the fool, decided he wanted a wife even greater. He wanted Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and Theseus, the king of Athens, the great hero, bound by his stupid, macho oath. Tenger agreed. This, I cannot stress enough, is the single greatest act of hubris in his entire life. He, a living mortal, agreed to help his friend storm the underworld to kidnap the wife of Hades. They travelled to the gates of hell. They descended. They fought their way all the way to the throne room of Hades himself. Hades, the king of the dead, was not impressed. He wasn't even angry. He was amused. "Brave heroes," he said, his voice like the grave. "Such a long journey. You must be weary. Please, sit, rest." And Theseus and Pirithous, their arrogance blinding them, sat. They sat down on a stone bench to negotiate with the god, and the bench sprang to life. It was the chair of forgetfulness. Living stone snakes erupted from it, coiling around their legs, their arms, their bodies, binding them, fusing them, not to the rock. They were stuck, trapped, not in a labyrinth, but on a chair, in hell. Pirithous would never leave. He was doomed forever. And Theseus, the great hero of Athens, was left to rot, a prisoner in the dark, his mind slowly fading for years. His story was over, until, by chance, another hero came to the underworld, his cousin, his idol, Heracles. He was on his own final, 12th labour, to capture Cerberus. He walked past the throne of Hades, and he saw his old friends. "My king," Heracles begged Hades, "let them go. They were fools, but they are my friends." Hades, respecting Heracles' strength, agreed. "You can take." Theseus, the other one, the one who wanted my wife, he stays. Heracles went to the chair. He grabbed Theseus, and with a rip, he tore him from the stone, leaving a piece of his flesh, his sin, behind. Theseus was free. He returned to the world of the living, a broken, haunted man. He returned to Athens, only to find it had forgotten him. His kidnapping of Helen had enraged her powerful brothers, who had attacked his city. A new king, Minotaur, was on the throne. The people no longer wanted their old, disgraced adventurer king. The hero who had founded Athens was exiled from Athens. He wandered, a beggar, just as his father had. He ended up on the island of Skyros, ruled by King Lycomedes. He was an old man, a nobody, begging for shelter, and King Lycomedes, pretending to be his friend, took him for a walk up to a high sea cliff, and there, either fearing him or paid by his enemies, the king pushed him. Theseus, the hero of Athens, the slayer of the Minotaur, fell, screaming, to his death on the rocks below. It was a pathetic, dishonourable, and tragic end for a man who had lived such an extraordinary life.